This summer, corn growers in western Nebraska got plenty of rain, which is good, but those storms brought hail too, which isn't so good. So as a result, some producers have been turning that hail-damaged crop into cattle feed. Now, questions are arising as to how corn silage compares to sugar beet pulp, a more familiar commodity for western Nebraska cattle. University of Nebraska cow and calf specialist Dr. Karla Jenkins joined me to discuss what you should look for if you're thinking about introducing your cattle to corn silage.
There are quite a few producers in western Nebraska who would normally just put up corn for grain, because once they do the calculations on how much it costs to produce the corn versus how much that crop is going to net them for grain versus silage, it makes financial sense for them to harvest it as corn grain. However, with the recent hailstorms that we had this summer, a lot of that yield was knocked back, and so when they go back and recalculate that, then it turns out that they would actually come out better if they made the corn into silage. And so that then made that available. They might not normally put up silage, and then they're trying to find a producer who would feed the silage that they could sell it to. And because we have an abundance of sugar beet pulp in the valley because of our sugar production, the sugar beet pulp is a byproduct of the sugar production in western Nebraska. That is what a lot of producers would use for an energy source. And so once they were given this opportunity to have access to some corn silage, they have asked questions about, the comparison of the two.
What does the producer need to think about when they're considering corn silage or sugar beet pulp and how they can be used in a calf's diet?
So the first thing that a producer needs to do when they're evaluating any feed source really is to put them on a comparable basis. And so the first thing we need to do is figure out all the costs that might go into acquiring a ton of corn silage, including the processing, the chopping, and then the price of the feed. And transportation, same with the beet pulp. What is it going to cost for you to get it from the factory to your farm? Add that into the price that you're paying for that commodity, and then put that on a dry matter basis to take the water out of it, because they don't have the same level of moisture in it. The next step that you need to do, though, since you want to use them as an energy source, is you need to compare what is their value per a unit of energy.
So yeah, this isn't something that can be substituted in on a straight up basis. So let's do some comparisons on corn silage versus sugar beet pulp. First off, what are the differences in the two when it comes to nutrition?
That is correct. So the sugar beet pulp has more energy in it than the corn silage. And so if we included some alfalfa and sugar beet pulp and some millet hay in a growing diet for a 500-pound calf that we wanted to have gain 1.5 pounds a day, then we would not just take the sugar beet pulp out and substitute the corn silage in, because the corn silage has less energy. So the corn silage would actually have to replace the beet pulp and some of the lower quality millet hay. So then a producer would need to evaluate, is it too costly to include the corn silage in place of the hay? Or does that work out well for me? Am I purchasing the hay? Did I grow the hay? And do those calculations to make sure that overall the diet comes out economical for them.
And what about cost?
So the costs that they need to keep in mind are the transportation cost, the feeding cost, any shrink that might come with those wetter products. And so they need to calculate those things in, and then what the cost, what they project that the calf will be worth when they put this additional gain on them, to see if that makes sense.
Are there any limits with either one when it comes to how much you should feed the calves?
So on a dry matter basis, we try to not include over 30% of the dry matter of sugar beet pulp, simply because the fiber content of the sugar beet pulp has something of a filling effect for the cattle. So it can decrease their intake a little bit, which can in turn decrease gain a little bit. So I like to keep that at less than 30%. And while the silage not necessarily would have those same limitations, 30 to 50% of the diet coming from silage is probably adequate. And again, it may come back down to the cost of that and what else it is substituting. And if it's a higher priced feed source than the hay or something else it's replacing, then we don't want to put it in there any more than we actually need for the energy value that we want.
So as we wrap up, what final advice do you have for someone who is serious about incorporating corn silage into their cattle diet?
I believe that if you are getting access to some corn silage that you don't normally get, you really want to get it tested, because you don't know how much hail damage it might have had. So you can't assume that hail damaged corn silage has the same nutritive value as corn silage that was grown and put up for corn silage. If it got hail damage, there may be quite a bit of ear damage, so there might not be near the corn in it. If leaves got knocked off the plant, you may be looking at half an ear and a stalk instead of the leafy material that goes with that and 2 ears of corn. And so having it tested at a commercial laboratory and having a pretty good feel for what the value of it is before it's incorporated into the diet will help you get the level of gain that you are actually anticipating.